Oh man, sometimes you stumble across things online that you read, you look at, you laugh at, and you're like, darn, I just have to share this. So, I was scrolling on my Twitter feed and I came across this tweet over here by John Vogl, who is a writer for The Athletic. He writes about Buffalo Sabres material, and he posted this tweet to one of his articles that kind of is interesting. Sabres. Trades. Here are 17 realistic deals and 4 blockbusters, thanks to the NHL's flat cap. And his article for The Athletic goes over different trade scenarios for the Buffalo Sabres that would essentially just be kind of in the same vein. The Sabres using the cap space that they have to acquire some expensive players from other teams who are looking to relieve themselves from their cap problems. We've noted it in a few videos, but the flat cap being introduced definitely does change the entire dynamic of how the economic process of NHL contracts are going to be signed and how they will be continued with management-wise. Because now, the salary cap is not going to go up for the next 2 or 3 years, so it makes some of the teams who have built their team on that assumption that it would go up kind of screwed. The Chicago Blackhawks are one of those teams, because they're in a position where they need to re-sign Dominik Kubalik, they need to re-sign Corey Crawford, they need to re-sign Malcolm Subban and Drake Caggiula and Slater Koekkoek and Dylan Strome, and all these guys are making not too much money. And in fact, the cap space of the Blackhawks right now currently sits at $175,000, so there certainly is some room to be improved here for how they're going to manage their cap going forward. So what Vogl is projecting is this, and I didn't get this from the actual Athletic article. We're going to be reading from a different source over here. This is letsgohawks.com, and what they did was they took the trade proposal that John Vogl writes in his Athletic article with the Chicago Blackhawks, and they write their own article about it here, which has been posted online. I saw this on Reddit. It's been popping up here and there, but essentially it goes over the idea that is promoted in the Athletic. And it's an interesting trade proposal, let's just say. Let's read some of this. Vogl believes Patrick Kane would be willing to come home and waive his no-movement clause for the Sabres. Going to Chicago? Well, Vogl speculates a return of Sam Reinhart, Casey Mittelstadt, and the 8th overall pick at this year's draft. Now the question, because it's a Hawks-related media outlet, asks, would you be willing to move Kane for those pieces, plus some salary cap relief? And that is our topic of this video. This trade proposal of Patrick Kane for Sam Reinhart, Casey Mittelstadt, and the 8th overall pick. Let's assess each of these assets right here. Patrick Kane, no, we're not going to talk about Kane. Let's skip Kane for last. Sam Reinhart is a 2014 drafted player out of the Buffalo Sabres organization who has honestly been pretty okay in the NHL in his limited years that he was here. He's 24 years old, so he's been in the league for a while, and he's just coming off of a 50-point season with the Sabres. Before that, he was at 65 points. The year before that, he was at 50. He's been a consistent 20-goal scorer his entire career, pretty much, ever since making the Sabres full-time in 2015-16. However, the thing is, Sam Reinhart is at the end of a short 2-year bridge deal that saw him get an average of $3.65 million every year. He's an RFA now. And honestly, with his profile, a 24-year-old 6'1", 192-pound right-wing center player, he could honestly get a little bit more money than $3.65 million. In fact, I would honestly not be surprised if he was able to get like $5 or $6 million. Especially with the fact that he's pretty young and he's got a long time to actually develop in this league. There's a lot to be looking forward to here if you want more out of Sam Reinhart. He was drafted 2nd overall in the 2014 draft, and to be fair, you could argue that he probably shouldn't have been. But the fact is, Reinhart was drafted there because he had so much hype around his name back at that draft. He was supposed to be a #1 elite potential player. And for the most part, since he still has 6 years until he hits 30 years old, there still is an ability for him to potentially reach that, although I will say, I wouldn't say it's as likely now than it appeared to be 5 years ago, let's just say. Then we move on to Casey Mittelstadt, whom we've already made a video about. That was the What's Going On with Casey Mittelstadt video. I'll leave a link in the description below to that. You can also watch that. It'll probably be somewhere on the side on your recommended videos. But he's a guy who also is an RFA on an expiring deal. And he could probably get himself either a really short $1 million contract on a prove-it deal, or if the team wants to lock him down, maybe they go a little bit longer and sign him for, I don't know, $2 million? I don't know if he's really worth that, but you get the idea here with Casey Mittelstadt. There's a lot of uncertainty with him because he is 21 years old, but he is coming off of somewhat of a poor year compared to what he had last year. The upwards progression of Casey Mittelstadt has not been there, and for the most part, people have been taking a look at other guys who were drafted after Mittelstadt in the 2017 NHL Draft and noting their upwards potentials. Gabriel Vilardi is a guy who was injured for a good part of his entire post-draft career, but ever since coming back to the Kings, he's seemed to have overtaken Mittelstadt in terms of progress as well. And I said this in the same Casey Mittelstadt video we mentioned earlier, but Mittelstadt is a guy who, to me, the game gets better when he becomes good. Because when he's at his best, Casey Mittelstadt is a guy who plays like Patrick Kane and who can control the game like Patrick Kane does in the offensive zone. It's just the likelihood that he fulfills his number one highest rated ceiling is a little bit lower now than it seemed to be back in 2017. So that leaves us with our 8th overall pick. Now, the 8th overall pick in this year's draft, I'll admit, 8th overall this year is more valuable than 8th overall was last year. Last year, the Edmonton Oilers selected Philip Broberg 8th overall, but we had a plethora of available prospects like Trevor Zegras, Cole Caulfield, Vasily Podkolzin, and Alex Newhook also available too. It's just, this year, the draft is honestly kind of better, especially in that top 10. I mean, at worst, you could probably get somebody like Cole Perfetti at number 8. Or if you're feeling ambitious, maybe a Lucas Raymond slides to 8. If you want, maybe an Alexander Holtz goes to number 8, or maybe even a Marco Rossi. There are some very, very good players in this draft, and 8th overall is a very good spot for any team that is drafting in that position. It's just, when you take an 8th overall pick in this year, even though it's strong, and you add it with a Sam Reinhart who's on an expiring deal, and a Casey Mittelstadt who's on an expiring deal, and you propose a trade for Patrick freaking Kane, who is a franchise player in this league, over a point per game pretty much every single year, aside from one the past few years, then you start to lose me a little bit here. This proposal, to me, just seems like taking all the Buffalo Sabres stuff that they would be willing to expend and adding it together for what is essentially a very, very good franchise-changing talent. To me, the philosophy is simple. You get rid of your best player, you get the other team's best player back, regardless of the circumstances, and you balance it out afterwards. To me, that's Jack Eichel. To me, that's Rasmus Dahlin. But obviously, I could understand why the author would want to get rid of Reinhart and Mittelstadt in the first for Kane, because if you do that, essentially what you're doing to the Sabres is you're just replacing Reinhart with Kane, and everything else remains the same. Keep Reinhart with Eichel alongside of Skinner, and then you have Dahlin on the blue end, and all of a sudden, things look really good in Buffalo. But at the same time, the Let's Go Hawks article asks Hawks fans, would you do this? And I'm not surprised that the majority of the Hawks fans that I've seen replying to this have said, absolutely not. Now on the cap perspective, you could definitely say, you know what, probably. Because Reinhart, you get him signed to a $6 million deal, let's just say. Worst case scenario, $7 million. You get Casey Mittelstadt signed to, let's just say, a $1 million contract. All of a sudden, that is an $8 million tax on your team, instead of the $10.5 million that Patrick Kane would carry to his contract for the next 3 years. So there certainly is some redeeming benefit to this idea. It's just, you're trading Patrick Kane. Like, that's kind of it. That's the bottom line here. Patrick Kane is one of the best players in the entire league today. He was 3rd in the entire NHL in points last year. And you're going to trade this guy for Reinhart, who isn't really as good as people thought he would be immediately, Casey Mittelstadt, who's even worse than people thought he would be, and an 8th overall pick that isn't going to help your team out until, what, 2022? I get that the Blackhawks are in somewhat of a rebuild mode, and they're trying to retool on the fly. But hey, it's Patrick Kane. Like it or not, this guy is going to be able to fetch you a much bigger return from other teams. And I know the no-move clause is a part of it because, we can go back to Buffalo, which is his hometown, and that's probably one of the only teams that he would be willing to wait for, and I get that. But you never know until you try, right? So talk to me in the comments below what you think about this trade proposal. I'll leave a link in the description to both John Vogl's Athletic article as well as the Let's Go Hawks article. Have I been too harsh in my assessment, or is this somewhat fair? Talk to me in the comments what you think. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.